So first, I'd like to invite the panel members to introduce themselves. First of all, Brian.
Hi everyone, Brian Lawson from the Road Safety Foundation, data person, data person at the Road Safety Foundation. I won't go on, Will. It will take up too much time if we all do long introductions.
That's fine. Evo.
Hi, I'm Ivo Wengraf. I do sums at the RAC Foundation.
Thank you, Oscar.
Hi everyone, I'm Oscar Freeman Davis. I work at Devon County Council Road Safety Team, primarily in Stats 19 analysis and business intelligence.
Thank you, Matt.
Matt Staton, work for Agilysys, overseeing the consultancy team here.
Thank you, and Stuart.
Stuart Fowler, Kent County Council. I'm the Road Safety Intelligence Team Leader here.
Okay, so looking at the government's road safety strategy, there are lots of items in it. We've picked a few that may be more relevant to people in the data community. The first of which is the proposal for a target, a KSI reduction target. First time we've had that since 2011, a 65% KSI reduction by 2035 on the 2022 to 24 baseline. To anyone in the group, do we need a target, and is this the right one? Is there anyone who's got a thought on that?
I'll jump in first.
If you want. I'll go, Oscar. You go first.
Yeah, sure. I think having a target is worthwhile. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to monitor your progress towards it, see how you're doing. Is it the right target? It's obviously a bit of a broader question. I think we're all fairly ascribed to the Vision Zero principle, which obviously suggests that there should be no KSI resulting on the road network as a result of crashes. However, I do understand the sort of difficulties with putting something like that into a national strategy. But I see it as a welcome step in the right direction, certainly as a starter for 10.
Thank you. And Matt, did you want to come in on there as well?
Yeah, I think I could just pick up what Oscar said there. I think it's important to recognise that the strategy does state the long-term ambition and nobody being killed or seriously injured on the roads, and this sets an ambitious 10-year target within that. I think the short answer I was going to give is yes, it's really important to have a target. I think there's been research commissioned and that shows the effectiveness of targets. And a big chunk of that is linked to the fact that when a country sets a target, it actually gets the response of lots of policy and intervention development. And I think that the important thing here is to see that happen off the back of that target so that we actually start working towards that ambition.
Okay, so I mean, between Matt and Oscar, you've kind of answered another sort of side question on that around resolving Vision Zero as a principle with a non-zero target. Do you think that the strategy achieves that, or do you think that the road safety world can explain to the public that we've been talking about Vision Zero, but we've got a non-zero target?
Yeah, I don't see the issue there, particularly the fact that the strategy is quite front in saying that it's a long-term ambition for nobody to be killed and seriously injured, aligns with the Vision Zero ambitions that a number of local authorities have set. I think the ambition in the target helps support. I've looked at some of the strategies we've been working on, and one in particular, 2030 target, kind of is there the 65% reduction by 2035 kind of follows on the same trajectory of ambition in terms of the work there. So I think there's a lot that those authorities that have adopted targets or partnerships that have adopted targets, I think, and Vision Zero approaches or approaches aligned to Safe System. There's a lot in here to support those and really kind of confirm the approaches that have been taken there. So I think yes, there may be some discussions, and I think there is a big element here around how that's communicated to communities and to the public. But I think there's an awful lot here to support it.
Thank you. And related to that targets, we've the strategy also talks about SPIs, safety performance indicators, it lists 17 different SPIs, some lagging indicators, some leading indicators. For the wider group, I wonder if anyone can explain and help us reach that definition of the difference between an SPI and a target. I'm trying to catch Brian's eye on this one. I don't know if Brian wants to come in on that.
Yeah, sorry. Can I just revisit just to kind of agree, I suppose, with Matt and Oscar about what they said about the alignment between Vision Zero and having a target.
Yeah.
Vision Zero isn't zero tomorrow. There's a question about the timeline. A target gets you on the way towards zero. Arguably, question. I want to see more evidence about just how effective having a target is. But I agree broadly with Matt. You're not going to get to zero tomorrow. So the question is where you set the target, what timeline in order to get you towards zero. And then one day you get to zero, but you need it within a sort of political horizon if politicians are going to be accountable for it. Just coming on to the safety performance indicators, I interpret safety performance indicators probably slightly differently from the way that the strategy lays out. So I think when they talk about lagging safety indicators, all they really mean in there is things that they'll monitor specifically. There's one or two, isn't it, with the children one, that have a specific target where they're hoping to reach a particular level, but the rest of them, they're just things they'll monitor, right? They're reactive things they'll monitor, and they're good to monitor. Don't get me wrong. For me, they're not necessarily safety performance indicators in the sense that I would use them. I tend to think of safety performance indicators as leading indicators, things that government can control, if you like, or road authorities can control more directly. That, if you like, give you a heads up as to what the future casualty numbers are going to be, what the future outcome numbers are going to be. So I really like the three, I think it is, that are in there: the level of mobile phone use, level of seatbelt use, and I think speeds is it. I like that. They're things that you can manage as a road authority. The outcomes are then the outcomes of that behaviour. But the point is, if your mobile phone use level is going up, for example, that's likely to result in more casualties. Well, you can control the mobile phone use level more directly by more policing, for example. So they're the levers, and that they are therefore more useful indicators to my mind. It doesn't mean it's not worth monitoring the other things, but I would like to see more leading indicators, because it's more things you can actually manage to help achieve the target. I'll stop whistling on about that.
No, I think that's a good distinction, I think, between the SPIs and the indicators. I think the road safety has been looking at SPIs for some years, and seeing some challenges with those. Stuart, I wonder if you can talk about some of the difficulties with finding meaningful SPIs that are realistic to record.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would echo Brian's comments around the fact that the majority of what's currently in the strategy are more measures of outcome and outcome measures, and not sort of true performance indicators. Those leading indicators that have a direct link to a cause or a correlation with care size, that's really what we want to be trying to measure moving forwards. And as you say, there's a number of challenges with that around data collection, data availability, some methodology considerations, and it's the challenge is a balance of trading off data requirements and at certain scales. So which performance indicators we're looking at nationally, which ones we're looking at regionally, and with every kind of element of those performance indicators you include, it changes the question slightly, and therefore it changes the methodology, the data required to present that, and how that can be reported. So at the moment, I would say it's great from the strategy perspective that there's an acknowledgement of performance indicators, and within the strategy there's I suppose quite a catch-all statement to say we're looking to develop this set of indicators further, and I think that's really important. But I think there's still quite a few challenges to be teased out there around things like data availability, around comparability between regions, and how these national indicators, or the indicators to be developed alongside the strategy, how they are reported both at national and regional levels, and how much comparability we want within those, because those questions all throw up more challenges for how the data is collected and how it's reported.
Thank you. So it seems like that comparability is key there. Moving on to another part of the strategy. Although
just before you move on, Will, just on that one, in terms of the safety performance indicators, I think it's really important, with the ambition that this strategy is setting and the fact that there is going to need to be change in the way we do things. The safety performance indicators become really important in measuring the short-term outcomes of those changes, because a lot of the, if we're adopting a safe system approach, a lot of the interventions will be baking in future KSI savings. And Brian talked about kind of the political cycle and the political window. 10 years, we've got at least 2 political cycles within that, for all of the highway authorities and government. And actually to be able to report on short-term outcomes of policy or intervention change is really important. And so they can't just be KSI based in terms of the monitoring information. It needs to cover those interim steps, the interim outcome measures from those interventions and policies that we know, based on evidence, will lead to the future KSI outcomes or KSI reduction outcomes. Gives meaningful data and statistics to those decision makers in the short term as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's an important point, that making sure that those long-term investments are rewarding politically in the shorter term.
And Will, sorry, just want to catch up on a point that Matt just mentioned at the end there about being able to share those performance indicators. A lot of the work that's been going on in the European Union at the moment on performance indicators and their trendline project, the outcomes of that has indicated that the real success is where you are you're measuring your performance in indicators, but then you're also you're reporting on those, and it's adding accountability to the whole sort of action of the implementation of the safe system. So I'm sure we'll get on to talking about the road safety board and action plans and how that falls out of the strategy at the moment. But it's really important that these indicators are developed and reported on and hold accountability to the rest of the action plan and the strategy itself.
Yeah, I think that ties into a key principle, that the outcome is KSI reduction, but the activity is building a safe system. So that's what needs to be measured and incentivized. And you're right. Yeah, we'll get on to those RSIB type questions. Also, there is it wasn't expected that graduated driving licensing would be in there, and indeed it wasn't. However, there is stuff in there aimed at younger driver risk, and the consultation on a 3 or 6 month minimum learning period. Looking at Evo for this one, do you think that type of approach will bring similar benefits to the GDL schemes seen in other countries?
No, absolutely not. It will at best bring about a fraction of that, and most of that learning period could get eaten up by waiting in the queue to get a driving test appointment. So we have a crisis in providing driving tests already. So mandating that you learn for longer is sort of a fait accompli, that you're already going to be learning for longer because you can't get an appointment. So the other thing is that in that context of GDL, the proportion of young drivers that are either priced out of being on the road or unable to get an appointment for a test and therefore not on the road, or at university or other reasons, means that the exposure for younger drivers has diminished. So you're not going to get, GDL itself wouldn't have got the big hit that it would have got maybe 10 years ago, because the younger driver has been kept off the road by other means, and I would say worse means than the restrictions that GDL would have put in place. But a minimum learning period in itself will be a very, very difficult thing to measure the effect of, and will be some fraction less than GDL itself, and GDL is going to be a worthwhile but not major component of the reduction.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, very difficult to measure. And I was wondering whether there is a methodology, a way of evaluating that against GDL in other countries.
Currently, we don't match Stats 19 to any kind of driving license history data. So what we ought to be doing, I think, is making sure that in the process of recording driving license number, that in the Stats 19 process, that we then go and derive. You have to be careful here because there are some regulations about what bit of driving history you can record, but that you derive things like did you have an actual license to drive the vehicle you crashed in or on, and when did you take the test that you for that, and that would allow us to begin to work backwards. But at the moment, I don't think we even come close to being able to record that. We're using driver age as a proxy, and it's a clumsy proxy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. And I think that point links us into some of the other stuff I alluded to a moment ago around data linking. So I think we may segue into that, but before we do, are there any other perspectives on the minimum learning period, or has Ivo tied it already?
Yeah, partly to echo what Ivo's already said. The average is currently 22 weeks waiting time. As a parent of a 17-year-old, I can attest to that. That is the case. But I think as well, we shouldn't ignore the fact that the lower alcohol limit consultation is in there as well. Obviously in other countries that is another part of GDL as it's badged. But this is being consulted on separately as individual policy measures. So there's another thing in there as well, linked to the minimum learning. But obviously the key thing is progressive development post-test. It's the key. This is focusing on pre-test, and then where other schemes go further forward is looking at how licensure and learning experience and on-road experience develops post-test.
Mm-hmm. And anyone thoughts on that? How that alcohol limit, the lowering of that alcohol limit? There's experience in Scotland, and data from that experience in Scotland, and whether young drivers are more vulnerable when they are close to that limit. Do people think it will disproportionately benefit young drivers to have that change?
My initial thought was that it wouldn't disproportionately benefit them, but a lower limit should be introduced and welcomed. I see the benefits that Scotland brings, and I don't necessarily, or I haven't seen the research that underpins that younger drivers would be better off with an even lower limit. I think the proposed reduction brings it in line with almost one drink could put you over the limit, depending on your sort of build and makeup. So I personally don't see any need to, but would definitely welcome a reduction in the alcohol limit to come in line with Scotland and the rest of the UK.
Okay, and I think that raises another point. So rather than segue into data linking, I think instead we're going to segue into ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems, and alco locks. Although I don't think there's a list of 18 new safety technologies the government want to bring in. The strategy also talks about alco locks for convicted drink drivers. Again, I think I maybe look to Ivo to start with this around which of those systems are likely to bring the greatest risk reductions.
Well, I think the the first point about the new vehicle technology is that we need to, I think, stop and take a moment to realize that our assumptions about the turnover of the vehicle fleet in the UK, we've never while this is all happening, we are changing vehicle taxation, creating some pretty weird anomalies for older vehicles. Older vehicles have never been more robust or more competitive relative to new vehicles in terms of customer experience. The average age of vehicles is getting older. The average mile driven is getting older, as in it's an older vehicle. And we have electrification, and people are a bit nervous about electrification. And we have gone from a point where the consumer was very exercised about good Euro NCAP scores, and now you see manufacturers advertising that actually they don't have a 5-star, they have a 4-star, which means they don't have those annoying things that go bing bong that you didn't want anyway. And so we have a bit of a shift there, so that the technology may be good, but we have to think very carefully that actually what's the condition of the average mile driven. So if we have lots of new vehicles with lots of new good technology, but we're driving lots of older vehicles without that technology longer, we have a problem that we're not quite seeing. So the underlying, under the TRL report that recently came out about the effectiveness of that technology was based on DFT assumptions that about new vehicles, but I don't think that really takes into account the mile driven, which is the question. I think the average experience of motorists is that you're driving older cars than you've ever done really before. So the other point that we have is we don't really have much work on what is fitted in real world testing, what is fitted in the real world to vehicles that crash. I'm currently involved in a data matching project trying to get vehicle fitment data matched to Stats 19. But that's quite a task, but we should be able to tell not what's happening in test, but what's happening on the road. The gossip in the industry is that some of these technologies in the abstract are very effective, but that you either get a manufacturer specific or a region specific variation, so that some of them are really good head on, but when they're slightly, if you're at a roundabout or something, they might slightly go skew with, or the one made in one country might be good, and the one made in another country might not be good. And I think to hit that ambitious target, we probably need to really get into the questions of which thing really matters, not the abstract crash test data, and what can we do to skew the characteristics of the average mile driven on the road and the makeup of miles driven on the road to mean that the most number of people are in the best possible vehicles. So we're not quite there yet, I think. I hope does that answer your question?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. And I think that the point you raise about possibly, I mean, if I'm interpreting this correctly, there may be from some consumers an incentive towards a vehicle with fewer ADAS systems because of the reputation they have for being annoying.
I think there are two questions. One, there's a pushback against things that go bing bong. And I think the consumer's understanding of them is that they do nothing more than go bing bong. And the other point is that a 20-year-old car now with a personalized number plate and an aftermarket stereo can pass as a new car. And in a climate where the next vehicle you buy or the vehicle after that might be dramatically different, taxed differently, different features, in the case of electric vehicles, different range, a lot of people might just go, you know what, I'll stick and sit it out and figure out what the world looks like in 5 years. And in the meantime, they don't appreciate the benefits of all that stuff, because a 20-year-old Volvo feels like a 5-year-old Volvo. You know, the average person can't really tell the difference. They may discover the difference when they crash it, but they can't tell the difference at the point at which they're making the decision about which vehicle to drive.
Yeah. A recent discussion I had with a manufacturer, their view was that the sort of the nudge, the fact that then they're default on but they're not permanently on and they're annoying, will eventually wear people down, and they'll accept them because it's easier to over time accept them and get used to them and adapt your driving than it is to switch them off at the start of every journey.
Absolutely, but at that same point, you might also be offered a perfectly decent alternative at a third or a quarter of the price that works just fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You might even find yourself in an anomaly of the vehicle excise duty regulations where you're driving around at 35 pounds a year to tax your car.
Mhm.
You know, you might see lots of other. The 2004 vehicle regulations put in much better rust protection as a byproduct of making them more crash resistant, and I think we're going to pay a price for that now, because those 2004 those vehicles that used to rot and be undrivable are now perfectly robust.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So more of an open question to the panel around: is there a need to enhance that reputation of ADAS or educate the public? And if and who's best placed to lead on a project like that?
I'll come in first. I think certainly there should be more awareness to the public, and in my mind, it falls almost entirely on car manufacturers and the designers of these vehicles to make clear these benefits. One of the a challenge that I've noted recently with our collision data is often we're seeing small trends in elderly drivers with brand new vehicles crashing to serious effect, and that raises a similar point that Ivo mentioned earlier with regards to how long has the vehicle been owned, and what, if any, was the training that was required when you got in that vehicle. As you say, going from a 2003 car to a 2026 car is going to be entirely different. It's going to feel different, and everything is going to be in a different place. So in my mind, I'd like to see car manufacturers not only explaining the benefits of ADAS and other features, but also requiring newer drivers to test the vehicle, to try it out, to park it, to reverse it, to put themselves in situations that are controlled, so that when they are on the actual network, less of the danger and inexperience with the features is realized.
I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I think one of the issues that we've got is the complete variety and variation between manufacturers of how things are registered to the driver, be that warnings, be that systems that will effectively take control of the vehicle at certain times, braking or lane assist. Some will just vibrate, some will actually move the vehicle. And I think we're talking about graduated licensing or post-license learning. These are big changes for people who have been driving for a long time. To get into a new car, it happens often if you take a hire car out, it's got all the latest technology on it, and all of a sudden you're faced with a completely different driving experience. And I think it's really important that we all learn a bit more about some of these new technologies and how that might present in the car. Now, whose responsibility is that? I think it is the vehicle manufacturers. Is that going to filter through? Perhaps not. Maybe there's more training, publicity that we can do, perhaps from local authority perspectives, about what to expect and why certain technologies are important, and some of the benefits of those. Because I think there's no doubt that some of the technologies will have an impact on particularly some of the more serious injuries occurring and the severity. But it's just about getting those messages across and explaining why those features are important, and how we can sort of learn to live with those features rather than perhaps get frustrated or annoyed from the outset.
Thanks. I'm wondering as well with the ADAS, and thinking towards you, Brian, whether you've come across any issues or around how these systems interact with the roads and roadsides, the environment, and the performance, whether the performance of those systems is affected by the quality of the infrastructure that they're operating within.
No, I think that's a good point. I think there was some talk the other day in the media around line markings and whether they're good enough even for automatic vehicles, for self-driving vehicles, vehicle technologies, I suppose. But no, to be honest, Will, that's probably a bit outside my remit, that area, beyond what you've just said, actually.
Okay. Fair enough. I think it's a question I've heard raised before by many, and I think it's going to be a while before anyone's in a position to fully answer it. So as we sort of alluded to earlier, when Eva was talking about the driver licensing thing and being able to understand more about risk through profiling people through driving licensing. Within the strategy, there is the linking with police and NHS data sets and formation of a road safety investigation branch. I'm thinking, Matt, I wonder if you can talk about if there's any existing guidance out there. Sorry, I've skipped across a couple of questions. I'm confusing two areas. I'll start that bit again. We're talking about the road safety investigation branch and linking of data sets. Matt, I wonder if what we can learn around linking health and police data sets and how that can help the road safety picture.
So it's something I've been involved in some projects in the past, and I think one of the key things about linking the police and the NHS data sets is a better understanding of injury, first of all, and severity of injury in particular, and also the potential there to understand the long-term impacts on individuals from crashes, and that kind of extending that post-crash element beyond the immediate response to the crash. But I think also there's a key element around understanding underreporting better, particularly when you link to think about the underreporting of cyclist casualties, and also other vulnerable road users that show up in the hospital data, not necessarily in Stats 19. There's an opportunity there to do more triangulation around that and understand that underreporting and the injury mechanisms better. I think merging that into then RSIB element that's alongside that in the strategy, I think the key thing is it's really we can a far greater depth of understanding of what is happening in collisions by looking in depth. Stats 19 is an incredibly comprehensive national data set. It is only the top layer really of information about what's happening in those crashes, and by using in-depth investigation, whether that's thematic or individual cases that are then brought together, you can build a much richer picture of some of those issues that maybe if you just look at an individual case in isolation, you're not joining those dots and linking a crash that might happen here to similar crashes that are happening elsewhere, and build a better picture about how that intervention could happen. So I think that importance of linking these data sets and looking at more in-depth data is around that depth of information and depth of understanding about what's happening in crashes, to really drive forward improved intervention.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm wondering, Oscar, there's there's that health data. We've mentioned driver license data. Are there any other data links you'd like to see? Do you think would make your life as an analyst easier if you could have much more slick links between data sets?
Yeah, completely. And I just want to echo what Matt said there in terms of, by combining more data sets, we're getting a better and more accurate representation of the true nature of the injuries that people suffer on the road. And certainly that underreporting is a real constant in my mind with regards to cyclists. In terms of additional data sets that would be useful, I would love to see a more standardized approach for damage-only data being extracted from police systems. And personally, a sort of really robust national traffic and speed data set as well would make my life not easier, but I'd have a lot more to do. And I really just want to sort of say that I think that a board at a national level has quite a lot of influence to go back to police forces, to go back to officers, to try and encourage greater accuracy within Stats 19 form reporting, because as a local authority, we're sort of at the front end of what the police send us, and we know from experience validating that that data isn't always accurate, and we have quite a large number of changes with regards to our severities and even the road user types that are filled out by police officers. So I would love to see a bit more national direction to getting that one version of the truth correct at source from the police, to sort of circumvent local authorities having to do that back and forth, and just, yeah, hours and hours, days saved, it would be, in my opinion.
Good, yeah, thanks. I've got Evo wanting to come in there, and then Stuart.
Yeah, just firstly to echo Matt and Oscar's points about the merits of data linkage. I think we're getting to a point where we're beginning to run out of low-hanging fruit, and we need to look deeper to find the next round of low-hanging fruit. But to put in a note of caution and a task for the analytical community is that the history of Stats 19 and health data linkage is a long saga, and the history of other forms of data linkage is not an illustrious one. And so and what you need in all of those examples, and I can think of many, which I won't mention to save people's embarrassment, I think of many that haven't worked out yet, is you need high level buy-in. You need the grand statements from very important people that go to Transport Select Committee hearings and such like, but you also need incredibly low level buy-in. And usually they fall apart because there's some guy who doesn't go to outside meetings, who writes SQL queries, who actually holds the key to the whole piece. And you need that person to care about it just as much. And it's the imbalance of that where these things begin to fall apart. So when to give you an example from RICIB, when we did the pilot project for that, even though National Highways paid very significant sums as part of that, there were still people in National Highways who just didn't have it on their priority list to submit the necessary data to produce incredibly persuasive, phenomenally persuasive statistics on the value of road safety interventions. So you need to get both of those people. So there's a task for the analytical community. With all of these mentions of data linkage, don't think that the senior people saying it's a great idea solves it and we can all just crack on now. There's proper work for a certain sort of analyst that now needs to be done. Otherwise, it will continue to just sort of drag along. It has gone on forever. In the panel that we had about health data linkage at ours a few months ago, or last year, there were women who'd worked on this who then went on maternity leave and came back to discover their applications for permission to access the data had gone nowhere across their pregnancy and their children's early childhood, and they come back and they were just still in the same place. So there's work to be done.
Yeah, so it won't happen automatically. Stuart, did you have something to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just on Evo's point, I think there's clearly, these are clearly some of the challenges that we'd like to see, I suppose, put to the Road Safety Board, the technical panel, and the investigation branch, I suppose, as blockers, and how we can overcome them as an industry. So I think it's a really good point made, and we've got an opportunity to make sure that these kinds of issues are the kinds of issues that are being tackled from the start by the new sort of structure as we move forward. Just in terms of data linkage, I was just going to echo some of Oscar's comments, and as you mentioned, I think two of the NHS linking data is great, and as Matt said, there's a lot of detail and depth it can give us there about injury and understanding that, but that's one side of the system, and we, I've always felt we need to learn more about the drivers and the people involved in these incidents as well. And I think it was from Essex, from your area, there was a really good piece of work done a couple of years ago linking fatality incidents with data from the police and data from social services around the drivers, the behaviours of the drivers, the backgrounds, whether they've held previous criminal convictions known to police, etc. I think as rich a picture as we can get on the casualty side, we should be trying to get on the driver's side as well, and that leaves vehicles, and Ivo's already mentioned some of the work he's been doing around linking more data sets into understanding the vehicles and the vehicle fleets that are actually in operation, not those that are kind of predicted. So I think getting those three areas, improved data linkage in those areas, will of course improve our understanding of what's happening.
Great, and I think as Matt said earlier, a lot of this data linkage and the additional insights can help better target interventions. And another part of the strategy was guidance for road safety education, training, and publicity interventions. And there has been guidance produced in the past. And I wonder, Matt, if you've got any comments on what's been done in the past, what might need to be done to make sure there is some suitable guidance for practitioners and decision makers.
Yeah, as you say, Will, there's a wealth of research and guidance that's out there around what good practice looks like, and so really the challenge is how to bring that all together into something that is easy for practitioners to use, and alongside that, how to ensure that it's implemented. So can that guidance be produced in a format that can be leveraged by funders, so that processes on certain stages of valuation or things like that need to be applied to be able to receive the funding. And I know Road Safety Trust do things. There's grant criteria that they have in place, and so it's kind of looking at so much practice out there. There's also a whole body of evidence about what good looks like, and it's finding a way to pull those two together to leverage that practice in all of the work that's being undertaken, or as much as possible that's being undertaken. It's a challenge.
Yeah, and I expect from this panel full support for the statement that that data certainly got a role in informing interventions and should appear. There should be something in the guidance about the use of data. And if anyone wants to sort of come in on specifically, what are the things that data can really do, where it needs to contribute, and how it needs to feature within that guidance. Or is it just, it's so blindingly obvious?
I think it's a challenging question, Will, in my opinion, from sort of a local authority. Of course, we want our interventions to be data-led and evidence-based. However, that relies on the data being there in the first place, and sometimes that isn't always there. And again, it does depend on who is doing the interpretation. So I know that specifically we have many different teams who deal with things like setting local speed limits or changing things like this. And though that process, while it is sort of standardized, is open to interpretation, in my opinion. It doesn't have a clear national guideline saying at these locations or at these populations or these road classifications, this might be an appropriate limit. So yeah, I'd be quite intrigued to see specifically the new sort of speed limit guidance that comes out of this, and how not only local authorities are going to be able to update their existing policies, but then the impact that has on the data that we're already collecting.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, you mentioned speed limits, and I'd like to probably just to leave time for some questions from the audience. Yes, speed limits and that infrastructure question. The guidance also includes adding manual for streets, updating manual for streets, and embedding it in planning policy. Which to my mind sounds like a very positive move, but a lot of our risk on rural roads are roads that are subject to DMRB. So Brian, I wonder if your experience with IRAP and what IRAP says about the risks on those roads, and whether there's something there that the policy, that the strategy is addressing, and anything that strategy might not be addressing.
I guess I just want to echo some of what Oscar was saying a moment ago, actually, that I noticed Oscar segued slightly from your question about data to evidence-based. And yeah, data is going to be evidence-based, right? But I think that's really important that things are evidence-based. And by that, we mean, what does the evidence say? Not, here's this thing we want to do, let's find some evidence to support it. You know, sometimes we look at it the wrong way around. I think the strategy is great from that point of view. The setting local speed limits guidance, as Oscar said, I think it is really important. And sorry, Will, I've lost track of what you asked me specifically.
So yeah,
you mentioned DMRB, and I think
I was trying to segue into DMRB.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about ensuring that infrastructure standards are safe. Is DMRB always appropriate for, you know, I know a lot of local authorities copy the DMRB standard, if you like, but do we know that that's appropriate in the local authority environment? I think there's possibly more to be done on that. I think IVAP helps. There are other tools that help, but yeah, I guess that's all I'd want to say on that way.
Okay. I'm going to. I understand. Hopefully, Nathan's had an eye on the chat because I cannot multitask and look at the chat as well. So, Nathan, I wonder if you've had any questions from the chat at all that can be put to the panel.
Yeah, there have been a few questions in the chat. I just wonder why we give people a chance to put some more, and I think maybe only a couple so far. I know, Brian, you had some work on targets that you were potentially just going to share briefly with us for a couple of minutes. So maybe while you do that, we can see other questions that come in the chat and then answer a couple of those at the end.
Sure. So let me put this on screen. Hopefully you can see my slides.
Yeah.
Bear with me. I just need to load my script on a different screen. Bear with. Right, there we are. Right. So just some context for the road safety casualty target, really. So it's based on the number of people who are killed or seriously injured, as we know. Normally nowadays we use the adjusted series, and that's because historically some casualty severities were misclassified. The adjusted series began to take account of that in 2004, and the latest available year is 2024. You can see how the numbers have fallen from getting on for 50,000 in 2004 to just below 30,000 a year the last 2 or 3 years. 30,000 KSIs a year, by the way, is one. I think it's every 18 minutes, certainly more than one every 20 minutes, which is an incredible number. You can see there was a big fall in the before 2010. Some of that's due to the economic crash of the late noughties, but you can see then the trajectory changed sharply in 2010, and there were various reasons for that, not just the economic crash. I think targets possibly are in there, but not the only reason by any means. Just to explain a bit more, 2004 to 2010, that's a 30% fall over those 6 years. 2010 to 2024 is about a 15% fall, so much longer period, only about half the reduction. Obviously, you've got COVID 2020 and 2021 when numbers went down dramatically for those 2 years, but they seem to have just reverted to the trend, to the long-term trend since then. And in fact, this is the trend line post 2010, excluding those 2 years. So you can see the figures are falling gradually, on average 1%, 1.3% a year, not including those 2 years. But obviously we deviated significantly from that trend line before 2010. If we don't get a big change in road safety and subject to economic crashes and pandemics and so on, we might reasonably expect the 1.3% reduction to continue indefinitely. So we'd get to about 25,000 adjusted KSI casualties in 2035, which is the target year. That reduction comes about for various reasons, primarily probably the safety of vehicles on our roads, which Ivo's talked about, others have talked about already, and the way the safety features that we're already embedding on new vehicles, the way they permeate across the fleet. The target 65% reduction from, I think you said it earlier, Will, from the 2022 to 2024 average will take us to about 10,000 a year, 10,000 casualties a year come 2035. This is just a smooth curve that we've done from the 2025 point down to that target in 2035. If you let me just make sure I'm quoting the right numbers that I've written down. So you can see it demands a really sharp change in the trajectory, and that average reduction is about 10% a year, 9 point something percent a year, if we start straight away. So in 2035, that's saving a prevention of around 15,000 KSIs in that year alone. Over the period as a whole, if we were to follow that trajectory, it would save around 95,000 KSI casualties, prevent 95,000 casualties roughly over the 10-year period. There might be a slight delay in us getting started on this revised trajectory. Obviously, things didn't radically change on 1st of Jan this year. So as a result of that, the longer we stay, if you like, on the old trend line, the steeper that new trend line is going to have to kick in order to achieve that target. That's all I was going to say. So I hope that's helpful. Sorry, quite quick.
Yeah, no, thank you, Brian. I think that helps visualize the that target reduction, and I sort of note just eyeballing the steepness of that slope. It looks fairly close to that slope leading up to the 2011 point, the last time that targets were in place. Yes, have we got any?
Yeah, we've got some questions. I mean, obviously we're fairly tight on time, so I suggest that panelists maybe have a quick skim of the chat at the end and answer any questions that they can. But we've got a question on the mandated learning syllabus for learner drivers, looping us back to ADAS here. Should the mandated ADAS features and how to use them be part of that syllabus so that drivers are aware of their purpose and how to use them properly? Any thoughts on that one?
It's an interesting idea. I fear that we've not yet reached a point where the implementation of some of those technologies are standardized enough that it makes sense in the syllabus. As in, I fear that you can't have a driving test for people who only drive VW Group cars and a driving test for people who drive Chinese cars and so on and so forth. I think we're at a very awkward period where you'd end up being quite vague about what all of this stuff does. And having gone through some of the terminology, very, very difficult to determine with some of the branded characteristics that they put on these features, what the manufacturer actually means the thing does, until you actually get in the car and have a go. So it's a worthwhile idea, but it's really tricky at the minute.
I think it's more valuable at point of sale because it can be vehicle specific, can't it, rather than kind of a generic approach which would only be delivered at one point in time as part of your learning, and then you have it again.
Although the biggest change in the sale of new vehicles in the last 10 years has been the growth of people buying vehicles online and not going to dealerships. So, the traditional interface is probably breaking down.
Yeah. On that topic, I very much enjoyed Kendrick's comments around, and it introduces a serious point of gamification that is used in interventions, but having a tutorial level with any new car, perhaps like an alco lock, but you've got to pass the tutorial before the car will let you actually drive it. So I do quite like that idea, especially as my son was showing me his Pokemon gym on the Switch last night. Utterly baffling for me, so I think I'd certainly need a tutorial with that. Were there any other
there's a couple of
questions
others
that people saw before we wrap up?
We've got maybe one last one then quickly. We've got one on NDORS courses. Do you think there needs to be any changes in how the NDORS courses are delivered or additional courses to better align with the new strategy? Any final comments on that one?
Excuse me, but what does NDORS stand for?
National Driving Offender Retraining Scheme. So speed awareness being the main one of those courses.
Yeah, that's the biggest one. Yeah.
Okay.
If there isn't any burning answers from the
all
panel,
I'll say
go ahead, Matt.
Well, all I was going to say was, making sure that the content is fully aligned to the safe system. Now it's clearly outlined in a government strategy. I think is making sure that tracks through would be my only comment. I think we need people to understand why it's there and the strategic elements to that safe system approach, Vision Zero, etc. Underpinning.
Okay, and that brings us to 12 o'clock on the dot. So thanks everyone for keeping to time and giving us some very illuminating answers. I've learned a lot. I hope everyone else has. I thank everyone for their attendance and attention, and a reminder of Steve's notices at the start of the webinar around joining the docs tickets and the Champions Network LinkedIn page. Amongst those are two I remembered. I think there were others, but yeah. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you at Joining the Dots conference. Take care and bye-bye.